Okay, let's get started. Your problem sets, if they're not handed in, are now late. Okay, so where are we? We have a few announcements today. I'm going to be gone next Monday, and unfortunately, I'm going to be gone from Thursday night through Monday night, so I don't have there's no way for me to reschedule my Monday office hours in a way that would still be useful for the problem set. I think Tuesday morning is probably not that helpful for any of us. So unfortunately, I'm just going to have to cancel my Monday office hours. So for those of you who have been taking advantage of that for the purposes of the problem set, I apologize. I guess we could do it by Skype, but I will be hanging out with my family far away from here. Problem set 7, this is for your own good. I've written problem set 7, but I haven't posted it, and that's because I realized that it was just insanely too hard. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time this afternoon making it a little bit more manageable. And I'll post it by the end of the day, and then as you know, your midterm is next Thursday, and Tuesday will be a review. As with the review session for the first midterm, I would encourage you not to think of the review as sort of optional, oh, I already know this stuff. My hope, I don't know if this was true for the first midterm, but my hope and intention is for the review session not to add new material, but to add perhaps new clarity about how to think about the material and how to put the material together. So I would encourage you to think of that as a lecture like any other that your success on the midterm will require you to attend. Okay, so this is slightly odd timing to do this in the middle of the semester. It might make more sense to do it at the end, but it fits in here pretty well for other reasons. We're going to start talking about, for just a couple of classes, behavioral economics and public policy. Now, obviously, one could teach an entire semester class on this, and I hope to before long over in the public policy school. You can just set it there. We'll sort it out. I think you could actually teach an entire degrry in the topic of behavioral economics and public policy, but we're just going to talk about it for a couple of lectures, and I just want to put across a couple of ideas. This is not intended to be, here's the answer, this is what we should do. This is supposed to be sort of some general thoughts about how we could frame behavioral economics and public policy, how we could start thinking about how to integrate behavioral economics into sort of mainstream public policy analysis. So as usual, I'm going to start out by talking about the standard model and some very, very basic public policy implications of the standard model, which you, by now, if you've taken the prerequisites for this class, have learned. And I'll review some of that. And I want to do that because I really want to try to convince you that when we relax the assumption of rational utility maximization in any of a wide variety of different ways, we are doing nothing particularly different than what you've seen over and over again in Econ 1, in Econ 100 or 101A, or in various other field classes where we relax the assumptions of the standard model of perfectly competitive markets and see what happens, right? And see what might be done about it. So we're doing something extremely standard. We're just pushing on an assumption that is wobblier than the others, okay? And then I'll give you an example, which you may or may not like. I don't like it very much. I want to make sure I'm clear that the specific public policy examples that I'm going to show you I'm not necessarily endorsing. Right? I want to give you some ways of thinking about this stuff. I'm not trying to tell you this is what should be done. Okay, so standard economics and public policy. What do we know? Or what have we been taught? Unregulated markets maximize social welfare, measured as the sum of consumer surplus and producer surplus. Now, what if I were to just draw a box around that statement? Unregulated markets maximize social welfare. If something maximizes social welfare, then we say that it's what? It's optimal. What else? It's sufficient, right? It's glorious. It's all hallowed, right? It's the best it can possibly be. Now, this is already a suspect idea because the truth of the matter is that you can maximize social welfare by giving all of the money to one person, and that's not necessarily the best in a lot of people's eyes. So there are questions of income distribution and who actually gets the surplus that economists typically don't think about. So, but setting that aside, this statement that unregulated markets maximize social welfare has, I'll say two things about it. On the one hand, under certain conditions, if you understand the assumptions of the model correctly, it is a factual statement that cannot actually be debated. Okay? If you understand the assumptions of the model correctly, which we're about to talk about, and those assumptions hold, it is a mathematical fact that unregulated markets maximize social welfare as measured by the sum of consumer and producer surplus as defined by us. Right? So if you define the measuring stick, you get to say what's what. And it is a mathematical, this statement, if under certain assumptions, it's a mathematical and undisputable fact, which is one of the nice things about formal economics. The other thing that I want to say about this statement, and this kind of came up in a conversation that I had with Tiago. Is Tiago here? I probably owe Tiago an apology, because I think I may have been a little bit sharp in this conversation the other day. He was sitting over there. I feel like in our society, this statement has become something like a religious article of faith, right? And I feel like we've stopped investigating its truth content, okay? When I was a little kid, I moved to this country when I was 6. I'm actually originally from England. And I was quite surprised to hear, I don't know if this is still true among 6-year-old Americans, but on an almost daily basis, one kid would step on some other kid's toes in some metaphorical sense. Like, you'd tell somebody, you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be doing this. And what you would be told always, very sharply, was, hey, this is a free country, right? Like, get off my neck. And we didn't investigate the truth content of the statement, right? It was just this article of faith. This is a free country, get off my neck, okay? And my opinion is that this statement has some of the same quality in our society. Unregulated markets maximize social welfare, get off my neck. Okay? And one of the things that I hope to accomplish, one of the things I think that a major in economics should accomplish, is to require you to investigate, to neither accept nor reject the truth of this statement, but to investigate it. Okay? And hopefully you've already done that in some of your other classes, looking at standard approaches to questioning the truthfulness of the statement. But now we're going to look at some others. Okay, so let me just back up and take away that red ink and say, what you learned in 100A is that unregulated markets maximize social welfare as measured by the sum of consumer and producer surplus if, A, markets are competitive, which means that there's no market power, right? There's no monopoly or oligopoly or cartel or anything like that, that there are no barriers to entry or exit. Ideally, you would actually want a homogeneous good, so there's no product differentiation, so there wouldn't be any monopolistic competition. You may or may not have learned about that. B, there are no externalities, including public goods. All of the costs and benefits of production and consumption are borne by the market participants, right? So there's no pollution, and there's no network benefits, like from education, where people other than the theory, by the way, hopefully this is clear clear. The theory is that by educating you, we're doing society, a benefit for society, not just you. So in the presence of positive or negative externalities, the statement doesn't hold. And then C, that buyers and sellers have perfect information, right? That there's no imperfect or asymmetric information. There are some others. There's assumptions about transaction costs that we don't talk about so much in this building, but that people talk about quite a lot over in Haas. And under these conditions, market equilibrium is efficient. And let me just where did I put my eraser? I'll just do it here. Just draw the all-hallowed familiar, what I like to call the X marks the spot graph. Okay. So we have a market. It has a demand curve. The demand curve, what is the demand curve? What is the height of the demand? What does this represent? Sorry, say it again? It's willingness to pay, and we sort of like to assume that if people are rational, that their willingness to pay represents their marginal benefit from consumption, right? So I'm going to call that PMV, private marginal benefit. And in the absence of externalities and imperfect information, that is also equal to the social marginal benefit of consumption. If somebody produces a unit of this good, let's just say this is iPhones. Somebody produces an iPhone and it gets consumed. The height of that line is the marginal benefit to the individual, and if there are no externalities, either in production or consumption, and the person has full information about the value of the iPhone, then we get to say that the height of that curve is the social marginal benefit of that iPhone. And then we have a supply curve. What's the height of the supply curve? It's the marginal cost. To whom? To the producer. It is the private marginal cost of producing and consuming the good. Okay? And in the absence of externalities or imperfect information, it is also, or monopoly, or market power, it is also the social marginal cost. Okay? And what we know is that if you're trying to maximize total benefit minus total cost, that's going to happen at the point where social marginal benefit is equal to the social marginal cost. Right? And what's glorious about perfectly competitive markets, when all of the assumptions hold, is that that point happens to be the market equilibrium. Okay? So Q market, under the appropriate assumptions, happens to also equal what is often referred to as Q opt, the optimal, socially optimal quantity as defined by this optimality condition. All right. Hopefully this is all painful review. Okay? Even though this is bunk, it should be the one thing you never forget from your economics education. Okay. We can draw this total social surplus. It's the producer surplus plus the consumer surplus. And we know that if we deviate in terms of quantity, we will either give up some social surplus unnecessarily, or we will incur some social cost unnecessarily. And the only place at which we are neither giving up available social surplus nor imposing unnecessary social cost is right there. Okay? So not only is this socially, not only is this efficient, but there's no way to make it more efficient. Okay? So we have two definitions of efficiency in economics, both of which are satisfied in this model. We have Pareto efficiency. There's no way to make anybody better off without making someone else worse off. Now, notice, if you move in either direction, you're making everybody worse off, right? So Pareto efficiency is kind of like a pretty lame standard to judge this by, because there's actually no way to make anybody better off at all by moving quantity. But can anybody see a way that you could make some people better off? What if you just jack the price through the roof? What if you produce this quantity and just somehow manage to convince consumers to pay that much? That sure makes the producers better off, but it makes the consumers worse off. So that's not, even though that doesn't change the total social surplus, that's not Pareto efficient. Okay? And then the other standard that we have is, it's called a variety of things. It's called cost-benefit analysis. It's called social welfare maximization. I like to call it Hicks-Calder efficiency, okay? Which is the idea that there's no way to make the total sum of social surplus better or bigger, no matter what you do. So you can move to any other point in this quadrant, and you will be reducing social welfare in one or more interesting ways. Okay? I feel like that's the single most important thing that I would love to be able to teach every single undergraduate economics student at this school and in the country, is that this is brilliantly and gloriously correct and mathematically indisputable, but only when those assumptions hold. And it simply doesn't have any truth content when those assumptions don't hold. Okay? So that's okay. So these are these critical assumptions. That's not the end of the world for standard economics, right? In fact, I think that in 100A, that's just, you're halfway through the semester when you get to this graph, okay? And the all-hallowed statement, which was incorrectly referred to in 100A as the first fundamental welfare theorem. And then you spend the second half of the class learning that it's okay because neoclassical economics can rescue markets from the ways in which they fail when these assumptions are violated, right? So you learn in 100A that violations of these assumptions cause market failures, which is the same thing as saying a loss of social welfare, aka inefficiency. And you then learn how government regulation can fix these market failures, right? And not only that, the standard model actually tells us exactly how to do it. Okay? It's actually an incredibly brilliant tool. So here's an example. And again, this should all be painfully familiar to you. I'm going to draw lots and lots of little X-shaped graphs today. Okay. So what do we want to do here? Suppose you have some supply curve, and we will say that that's the private marginal cost. And, oh, I'm sorry, what's my example? My example is the consumption of gasoline. So we're going to forget about the pollution that is generated by producing gasoline. We're just going to focus on the pollution from burning gasoline in your car. Okay? So let's just wave our hands at the externality in production and just say that the private marginal cost of producing gasoline is equal to the social marginal cost. Let's say we fixed that part of the market already. Okay? And then there's some demand for gasoline, which is equal to the private marginal benefit. But the problem is that then there's this harm that's done to somebody other than the driver of the car that's burning the gasoline. And the way we typically model that is we say, look, there's actually some external marginal cost, and we're going to model it as being constant for every gallon of gas. So that's the marginal cost of the external harm done by the pollution from burning gasoline. All right? And so what we get is that this curve is now the social marginal benefit curve, right? It's less than the private marginal benefit. And so what's the analysis? Okay? The first step in the analysis is that the model tells us qualitatively the nature of market failure, the way that the market fails to achieve social optimality. The market does this. Social optimality is that. Okay? And so the nature of the market failure is that Q market is too big. It's bigger than Q opt. Okay? Overproduction. The model also tells us quantitatively how the market fails, how much the market fails. Okay? We know that if these units are suboptimal because they shouldn't have been produced, then the cost of those units to society is the difference between the height of the supply curve is the cost of society, and the height of the demand curve. Switch colors. The height of the supply curve is the cost of society of those units. The height of the social marginal benefit curve is the benefit, the true benefit to society of those units, and the difference between the two is this deadweight loss. And the model tells us the size of that deadweight loss. Now, if you're willing to accept the assumption that these curves are straight lines, which over small changes in price is not a totally unrealistic assumption, then that actually quantitatively is 1/2 times the size of the marginal cost of the externality times that change in quantity, that suboptimal quantity. And in theory, and indeed to a considerable extent in practice, you can actually go out and measure those things. Okay? So you can say quantitatively, precisely, well, not precisely, but you can get a reasonably good approximation of the size of the failure. Finally, and this is the real power of the model, is that the model actually tells us exactly what public policy can do about it. And I'm very carefully choosing the word can, because the fact that public policy can, in theory, fix the market does not necessarily mean that we should, as a society, do what the model tells us. There may be other considerations that this model doesn't address. But the model tells us if you want to get to Q-opt, you need to somehow get the market to internalize that external harm, and one way you can do it is you can stick in a tax. Okay? And it tells us exactly what the tax should be. The tax should be equal to the marginal cost of the externality. And if you don't believe that those two lines should be parallel, then all I need to tell you is that the taxes should be equal to the marginal cost of the externality at Q-opt. Okay? So this is actually pretty amazing. Right? If you roll the clock back 130 years, you would find yourself living in a society where this is completely not understood. Completely not understood, except in the vaguest possible terms. And now we have it nailed. Okay? Now, there are challenges, right? We can measure that thing, the demand curve, with some confidence. And we can measure this thing, the supply curve, with similar confidence, particularly for something like gasoline. This thing, on the other hand, that marginal cost, there's measurement challenges there. It's not so obvious how you measure that, but it's also not totally impossible. We have a way of measuring value to society that we're relatively confident in, which is willingness to pay, as Wanjiku suggested earlier, right? Under certain assumptions, people's willingness to pay for something should tell us how much they actually value it. Okay, so the pollution, the health harm being done here isn't captured in people's willingness to pay for gasoline, but we can go out and ask them their willingness to pay for good health, right? And for their children to not have asthma. That's not out of reach. There's challenges involved in figuring out what is the most accurate and reliable way to measure that willingness to pay, but it's not out of reach, and people do it all the time. If you go down to G&E Hall, you'll find whole cadres of environmental economists doing exactly this. So, I mean, the general lesson that I would like for people to walk away from Econ 100A with is, there's this big debate in our country about are markets good or bad, is government good or bad? And I will tell you here's my position on this. Markets are good, except when they're not. Government is bad, except when it's not. Okay? And the correct answer is that the devil is in the details. Okay? That's my ideology right there. I've just gotten a splinter in my leg. Right? Which is just another example of the devil being in the details. And there are all these other examples with which you are more or less familiar. Monopoly, public goods, asymmetric information. The model teaches us the ways in which these things cause the market to fail, to reach social optimality, and the ways in which public policy potentially could solve the problem. Okay? Now then, let's start talking about behavioral economics and public policy. The standard model of perfectly competitive markets, which reaches this really quite brilliant conclusion that unregulated markets are socially optimal, makes two additional assumptions, which you learned in Econ 100A or some other, well, you learned it in, hopefully, in Econ 1, which is that firms rationally maximize profits and consumers rationally maximize utility. Okay? Now, this is not emphasized so much, even though it is actually the first half of the class. Right? The whole first half of Econ 100A, and more than that if you took 101A, is just cranking up the model of rational utility maximization and rational profit maximization. And you're told all along the way, we're making this assumption, we're making that assumption, we're making the assumption of rationality, we're making the assumption of monotonicity, we're making the assumption of convexity. You're told all along the way what assumptions are being made. And then you get to X marks the spot, and we just stop talking about those assumptions. We continue to talk about the assumption of no market power and no asymmetric information, and to some extent no transaction costs, et cetera, but we stop talking about these ones. So this, this class is, we don't have, unfortunately, I don't have much to say about firms rationally maximizing profit. This class is about consumers failing to rationally maximize their utility. And we're not just waving our hands at this notion. We're trying to demonstrate it with some degree of scientific rigor, right? And, as with all the other assumptions of this model, we want to know what happens to markets when this assumption fails. Now, on the first day of class, I read you this quote from, what's his name? Dan Ariely, who basically said, look, this assumption fails. This model, out with it. Off with its head. It's ridiculous. I have no time for it. I just want to talk about the government. And I don't know what Dan Ariely would say if he sat him down in a quiet room and gave him a strong cup of coffee, but I feel like that's too strong of a statement. I feel like that's overwhelmingly too strong of a statement. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I want to stick with this model and continue to do what neoclassical economics has been doing for these past 130 years, which is to tweak this model and see what happens. Okay? And to